Tomorrow is Election Day. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I talk with Dr. Gibbs Knotts, a political science professor at the College of Charleston. And be sure to like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Dr. Gibbs Knotts, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey, it's so great to be here, Clinton. Such an exciting day for the state of South Carolina tomorrow and for our country. So I'm looking forward to talking about politics.
As a matter of fact, you are the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and obviously you're a professor of political science at the College of Charleston, and you're the co-author of First in the South. You just became the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the College of Charleston. Congratulations on that. And you obviously, as you just mentioned, closely watching the 2020 political climate. What would be the title of your course right now?
Oh, wow. I would say an incredibly polarized country. I mean, we basically have gotten into our camps and, you know, Democrats tend to talk to other Democrats, Republicans tend to talk to other Republicans. You know, folks are a lot of times getting their news from very different sources. And so kind of how we got to that point and maybe how we can build bridges. I mean, we're doing a lot of things at College of Charleston where students are, you know, from different perspectives are talking with each other. They're doing joint events. I'd like to see more of that done both in South Carolina and across our country, because we've got to go back to a situation where we talk to people on the other side and we work with people on the other side. And there isn't just this zero-sum game that we have in American politics today.
And what's that game right now?
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, it's all about wins and losses, and it's about, you know, particularly, you know, painting the other side as the enemy. And it really isn't. I mean, it really is about ultimately what's better for the United States. And, you know, I'm one who believes that, you know, when we put, you know, people in a room together or, you know, people in a legislature together, you know, there are opportunities for candidates to, really make the best policy out there by, you know, putting their heads together and drawing on Democratic and Republican perspectives, not just having one perspective.
And let me go to October 31st, 2020. The Post-Inquiry writes this, quote, South Carolina residents stood in long lines for several hours to cast their ballots in one of the last days for in-person absentee ballot voting in the 2020 general election. You said this on Twitter, quote, it shouldn't be this hard to vote. We have to do better. Where does South Carolina have to do better with in-person absentee voting?
You know, I think that, you know, I don't know what, think about if a store had 4 or 5, 6 hour lines to check out. I mean, other than like, you know, on Christmas shopping or something like that, you know, it's very rare, you know, Black Friday, it's very rare to have that type of, you know, those types of lines. And so we've got to figure out a way to make it easier for people to vote. We still have to have election integrity. We still need to make sure that only the people who are allowed to vote can vote. But, you know, to have these giant lines is just, you know, doesn't make sense. And it was the Saturday before, because people have jobs. It's hard to take off work, and that could have been the day they took off. You know, it's hard to take off on election day sometimes, particularly if you're an hourly employee. And so just more creative ways to make it easier for people to vote, to make it more convenient. I strongly believe that we need to have more people participating in the political system, not less people. And so I was disappointed. I mean, I was impressed that people are willing to stand in line that long, but it just shouldn't have to be that hard. We should look at states that have more mail-in voting. We should maybe expand the number of sites to not just have 4. I mean, we've got to consider all different options to make it easier for people to vote.
Where is the election integrity right now in 2020?
You know, I feel really, really good. I mean, I think that when you look at the local election officials, when you look at the state election officials, these are career professionals who, you know, are making sure that, you know, the right ballots are counted and that people, you know, we can believe in the results. And so, you know, I feel pretty good about the people. You know, I am disheartened a little bit by some of the lawsuits, and I worry that after Election Day, if there's going to be everything's going to get challenged and everything's going to get litigated, then I think that's ultimately not going to be good for the country. But I think we just need to get out of the way and let the local professionals, the local administrators do their job.
Now, if you were to get those local professionals and local politicians in the room with some of your students from the College of Charleston, how would you find creative ways to make absentee voting better?
I think not making it so confusing. I mean, not making it where, you've got an envelope inside an envelope, and then you do have to get a witness. You don't have to get a witness. Where do you turn it in? I mean, obviously, people are worried about whether the mail would be delivered in time. I just think we've got to make mail-in voting easier. And then we've also got to make, maybe not have absentee early voting, but have some type of early voting where, it's just, there are more than just 4 sites. So people can, have a little bit more of an option to vote when it's convenient for them. I mean, I think that we can't vote 6 months in advance, but, it's very possible that election day, people have to be at work. They have to have a doctor's appointment. They have things where they can't work around it quite as easily. And so I think we just need to make it more convenient. We have the technology to do that. I think in other states are doing, and that's the great thing is, we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. We can look at some other places who are doing a good job and don't have 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8 hour lines. And we can try to figure out what they're doing and emulate those here in South Carolina.
Now, I know you've been around to a lot of the polling sites around Charleston. Where exactly should sites be expanded in your mind?
Yeah, I think just making sure that we don't have too many people. I think we should go back and say, okay, well, what are the number of people that are eligible to vote? Where were the lines the longest? Are there some other opportunities to open up some new places? I mean, I think we need to do a deep dive postmortem after this election and try to figure out what worked and didn't work. But we can figure this out. I mean, it might take some extra resources to potentially staff or open some new places. But I mean, there really, Quintin, isn't anything more important than making sure people can vote and making sure they can vote in a way that is not completely inconvenient, that does not take half a day to go and figure out how to get what is their most important civic duty.
And where exactly were the lines long when you saw them at the polls?
So when I was looking at the photo gallery from the Post and Courier, yes, they had long lines at the 4 sites in particularly I guess it was West Ashley, North Charleston, Mount Pleasant, and downtown. And so and it could be I think the other side of the argument is that that was one of the last dates to do the early voting, and it could be that people were trying to rush, and it could be that election day lines aren't going to be as long because so many people have voted early. So I mean, I think to get a full picture of the story, Quintin, we need to sort of say, okay, well, how are the lines and what did it look like during our early voting? Do we need to either expand the number of early voting sites or expand the time of early voting? And then let's see how it all fits with tomorrow. I mean, when we have election day tomorrow, what are the lines like? How does it go? Then we take that total package and try to dissect what can be improved and what we could do a little bit differently.
And let me go back to what you just said recently, and this is actually tying in with what you're saying, but SC's record-breaking voter turnout nears 900,000 with a week until election day. I think that's past 1 million now. Right. But that's the headline for the Post and Courier. You told the newspaper that it's not surprising that the absentee voting became a political volleyball, but you're disappointed it has become so polarized. Who has the ball in their corner now, a day before election day?
I think that every poll I've seen, Quintin, shows that Democrats were more likely during the pandemic to take advantage of mail-in voting. Republicans are more likely to vote same day. One of the things that South Carolina should probably think about changing is my understanding, they cannot start counting the mail-in ballots until election day. Well, normally that's not a huge number. It's no big deal. But because we're in a pandemic and because so many people voted by mail, it's going to potentially take a little longer. And so it's going to delay. And I think part of the job of journalists and people that are out there talking about the election, they need to say, okay, look, here's what's been reported so far, but we still got a big amount of mail votes that are being counted. And so maybe we should do like some other states. I think Florida's been counting those for a few weeks. Maybe that makes more sense in South Carolina going forward to not wait until election day. And as people see the election results being posted, we need to make sure we kind of know the rules and what's out there and what's not. And Quintin, normally it wouldn't matter that much if there was no difference between the type of voter who votes by mail or votes by in person. But because of the pandemic and because this pandemic in a lot of ways has become political, which is unfortunate. There's not the male voters people voting by mail are not randomly distributed across the population. I mean, there's going to likely more be Democrats voting by mail, Republicans voting on election day.
Now, exactly in Charleston County, who exactly is voting by mail and who's doing it in person?
So we don't know for sure. I haven't seen any Charleston County numbers, but if the national trends hold, it's more likely that folks that are going to support Democratic candidates were a little more likely to vote by mail. And then folks that are going to support Republican candidates might be a little more likely to show up on Tuesday. So we just have to keep that in mind. I mean, I think that the safest and smartest and most prudent thing to do is to sort of wait and see until all the votes are tallied. And the networks, that call elections, the AP is really good. I always look at them. They're looking at a combination of things. So they're going to see, okay, where do the votes come from? What do the exit polls say? So if the AP calls a race, I'll feel pretty confident. But again, if it's just people voting on election day and then, the voter by mail, that those folks have just as much of a right of their vote counting as anyone else. I think we just have to be a little patient if those are outstanding and we don't have those at, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night on election day. I'd just say, stay patient. It's better to get this right than to jump to any kind of conclusion. And ultimately, we'll find out in a few days. And I don't expect this is going to take a few weeks, but it might take a few days, given the volume of people that voted by mail this time.
When you look at those exit polls, what are you looking at right now, Gibbs?
So, I mean, the exit polls, obviously those are going to get released once the polls start closing. So I'm going to be looking to see, what's the top line, how many people said they voted for Democrats and how many people said they voted for Republicans. And then I'm also looking to see, how college educated voters and suburban voters have shifted. That was a group that Trump did fairly well with in 2016. The popular narrative is that suburbanites, suburban women in particular, are moving away from Trump and they're moving towards Biden. I'm interested to see how big how that shift occurs and how big that shift is. I mean, I think we know Trump is going to do well in rural areas, particularly among white voters. We know Biden's going to do well with African-American voters. But I'm looking to see I sort of see the suburbs as kind of a new battleground. And I'm looking to see how suburban areas. I mean, Georgia's our neighboring state, right. And that's a state that is in play this time, and it's sort of surprising given how red and how Republican Georgia's been over the last several decades. And so, I mean, if Georgia ends up being a Biden state, then I think it's going to be the suburban areas around Atlanta. And Atlanta is a huge city with a massive amount of suburbs. They're able to shift a little more blue. That can be very helpful for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Speaking of suburbs, let me take you to the 1st Congressional District. Yeah. ETV radio journalist Victoria Hansen wrote this story for the race and how the district is actually changing. She says this quote, meaning in describing you, Dr. Gibbs Knotts, a political science professor at the College of Charleston, says the district is changing. He says it's a really, really suburban, highly educated district. So it's a district that Republicans can win, but obviously, as Joe Cunningham has shown, a Democrat can win. What counties in the district can Republicans win, and what counties can the Democrats win?
So Charleston County has become a pretty strong Democratic county. I mean, I think Charleston County, when you look at the county as a whole, went for Obama in 08, Obama in 12, Clinton in 16. But, the 1st District isn't just Charleston County. It also includes portions of Berkeley County. I think it goes down to the sort of, Beaufort area and things like that. And so you've got a lot of retirees. You've got a lot of military folks. And so, Democrats certainly are going to do well in Charleston County, and that's going to be an important part of the base. But, I do think there are other places, Trump's support and the Republican support has started to slip a little bit among retired folks over 65. That's kind of been a big story. That's going to be big in Florida this time with so many retirees in that state. And so, I mean, that's a group that Democrats could potentially reel back in. I think it's a group that Joe Cunningham probably did fairly well with in 2018. And it's been interesting to see because, again, to have a swing congressional district here in Charleston has also been really exciting. So in addition to having a very competitive Senate election. We've got this really competitive congressional district right here in Charleston. I'm very curious to see whether Joe Cunningham will be able to hold on to his seat. I mean, this was drawn up as a seat that Democrats were really tailor-made to win. Donald Trump won by 13 percentage points back in 2016. Nancy Mace is a strong candidate, so that's going to be a very interesting outcome on election night.
Well, let me ask you this, Gibbs. Will this help determine the strength of the balance in the House of Representatives?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is the type, Nancy Pelosi isn't speaker because of AOC or Jim Clyburn. Those two are in pretty safe districts. Clyburn's district is likely to be a Democrat. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district's likely to be a Democrat, but it's districts like Joe Cunningham's that are, could go either way, that have had Republicans. Those are the ones that need to be held on to for the Democrats to maintain control in the House of Representatives. And so, that's why, that's why it gets national attention. That's why it's rated. I think it's leaning Democrat right now, according to most of the rating agencies. But, it's always going to be competitive. Given the way the district is made, district makeup, and the number of Republicans that are living in the first congressional district.
And let me ask you this too: when did the district actually shift to more suburban women and more, of a highly educated district?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. A combination of things. I mean, I think as people have moved to Charleston and South Carolina, certainly Mount Pleasant, people have moved for job opportunities. There's been unbelievable growth. Daniel Island is another sort of place. And so people are moving from all over the world to work at Boeing or Volvo or one of the tech companies on Daniel Island. And so I think it's really accelerated. But, it's always been probably a fairly suburban, not always, but certainly for the last several decades, a fairly suburban district. But the suburbs were really strong Republican areas. They've always been kind of the bedrock of support for the Republican Party, particularly in the South. We see that starting to change a little bit with the presidency of Donald Trump. I think as college-educated suburbanites have started to say, I'm all for low taxes, but I don't really like these tweets. I don't really like some of the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration. I think it started to make suburban voters give Biden a closer look. And, certainly they gave Joe Cunningham a closer look. I think in part as a check on Trump in 2018 when they sent Joe Cunningham to Washington.
And obviously, she says this: Knox calls the suburbs the new battleground, with Republicans finding strength in white voters from the rural areas and Democrats counting on support in urban communities. Where's Nancy Mace's strength in Goose Creek, and where's Joe Cunningham's strength, say, in Maryville, Asheville, and West Ashley?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Nancy Mace grew up in Goose Creek, and I think, for conservative folks, for folks that are, certainly for evangelicals. Again, evangelicals, we always think about the upstate, religious conservatives, in white evangelicals in South Carolina, but there are plenty of white evangelicals here in the low country of South Carolina as well. That's going to be a core part of Nancy Mace's support. And then people that just, are really concerned about the size of government, want to keep taxes down. And there are people like that are diehard Republican Mace supporters all over the first congressional district. There are people like that on Daniel Island. There are people like that in Mount Pleasant. And so Nancy Mace certainly can draw support from across the district. Joe Cunningham, on the other hand, I think he's, it's folks that, that are a little more moderate. They might like smaller government. They certainly don't want to go out and probably may not have been Bernie Sanders supporters, let's say, but they do, support, healthcare, and they want to make sure that, people with pre-existing conditions are protected. They're going to be, somebody who Joe Cunningham can potentially count on as supportive.
And what are the other top issues in this district?
It's a great question. Certainly, the district, I think, is always going to be about the environment and the coast and protecting our coast. That was big in 2018. I think it continues to be big. I think people are concerned about fiscal conservatism. They don't want to see taxes get too high. They don't want to see too much deficit spending. I think, Joe Cunningham as a Democrat has done a good job of, being somebody who's talked about trying to rein in spending a little bit at the federal level. I think those are probably two of the main issues. I think healthcare has become an important issue, and particularly because we're in the midst of a pandemic, it's been pretty key. And, it's interesting that both of these candidates, Nancy Mace and Joe Cunningham, both had the coronavirus. They fortunately both recovered. But I think talking about the coronavirus and different approaches for how we get both the district, the state, and the country moving forward post-election, I think that's been certainly something that's been talked about quite a bit.
Social media and the young vote. You also told WCBD in late October, quote, social media can sort of help fuel the young vote towards both Joe Biden and Jamie Harrison here in South Carolina. Jamie Harrison versus Joe Biden. Let me ask you this, Gibbs. What campaign is getting the most fuel of the young vote from social media here in South Carolina?
Yeah, I think that's, some young folks are so savvy on social media, and they certainly kind of know their way around. And, you cannot do anything on the internet right now and not see a Jamie Harrison or a Lindsey Graham ad for that matter. I mean, really, those two, the amount of money they've raised and the amount of time they've spent. And again, it's been one of these new developments. Certainly we know about Facebook and the role it plays, but, the young folks are really using TikTok a lot, so they're sharing their political views. They're talking about candidates. There are tons of ways that social media people are sharing ideas, they're sharing information, and it's played a role in this 2020 election. It's certainly something that people are going to be studying, for years to come, as the increased and important role social media plays.
And what else would you be studying 2 years from now?
Yeah, certainly you want to take a look at, was the Trump presidency a 4-year blip, or did it completely redefine American politics? I'm sort of, we'll know, if Trump gets reelected again, then I think, that's going to be, very different than was it just this 4-year type of thing. What's going to happen with the Republican Party? Those folks that were turned off by Trump, are they going to reemerge and sort of wrestle control of the Republican Party, or really is the Republican Party the Trump party from this point forward? Will Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. Take the mantle from Trump once he steps away from politics? I think all those things will be studied. And I think we're going to look back and just try to figure out, what got us to the point where we became so polarized in our country, and what are the ways we can come together and continue to have rigorous political debate, but not have it become so personal that it impacts who our friends are, who we talk to. I think we've got to figure out a way to kind of reach across and engage with people that think differently than we do.
And you told Live 5 News in October, quote, I think when elections are close, any little thing can have an impact. One race is really close is the United States Senate race between Jamie Harrison and obviously United States Senator Lindsey Graham. Jamie said this on Twitter Saturday, quote, first, Lindsey Graham said that the black folks can do anything in South Carolina as long as they're conservative. Now he says young women can have a place in America if they're pro-life and come from traditional families. Any other requirements we should know about Lindsey? And that's what Jamie is saying. Here's some context. Senator Graham was pushing back on the criticism of now Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and he says he's seeking to reassure women who share her worldview, that there's a place for them in society. Where in South Carolina do women share his worldview?
Well, certainly there's a lot of conservative women in South Carolina. I mean, there are people that have, helped. Every statewide elected official in South Carolina right now is a Republican. Obviously, Jamie Harrison's hoping to change that. And so, there are certainly, and women are the majority of voters. And so, certainly, women have a big impact in what's going on. I mean, I think that, I found Graham's comments, certainly they've been taken out of context a little bit, but I did find them disturbing because it is, people should be able to, this should be a state where if you're liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, black or white, you can go out and make your case and, you can bring, I think healthy states have competitive two-party systems. And I, for one, like to see, I think if the Democrats controlled everything, that wouldn't necessarily be good for South Carolina. Likewise, complete Republican dominance with no opposition, I think is also not a good thing. When people have gone back and studied kind of what type of outcomes states produce, it's states with competitive two-party systems. generally have healthier political systems end up, I think, having people, the citizens tend to be feel better about their governments. And so that's certainly something that I see. And so I think that, we need to be a state where no matter your race, no matter your gender, you can go out and have an impact and make your case and find people that will support you.
Where does he think the rest of the females who don't follow his ideals are supposed to go?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think there needs to be a place in South Carolina. I'm not sure where he thinks they're supposed to go, but I mean, obviously there are a lot of, progressive and moderate citizens and voters that are going to go and support Jamie Harrison. They're certainly supporting Joe Cunningham. And so, I think those were a little bit unfortunate comments by Lindsey Graham. I certainly think that we need to be a state where, there are viable options, both Democrats and Republicans. Again, I think that'll make for a healthier democratic system in South Carolina.
And the United States Senator Lindsey Graham said this during Friday's ETV debate. He says this, quote, "Harrison is a good man, but Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton are his political mentors and inspiration." He calls Senator Sanders, quote, "a champion." What should Jamie champion for if he's elected to the Senate?
So I think if he's elected to the Senate, he has to follow in a lot of ways the path of Joe Cunningham over the last couple of years. I mean, I think he's got to pick some issues where he speaks out against the Democratic Party. If Harrison becomes a senator and goes and votes straight line Democrat every single time, I think that would be a mistake. And we are a fairly conservative state still. And so I think he needs to support the Democrats when he can, but also on certain issues that he feels like South Carolina is, if there's a clear consensus in South Carolina, he's got to be willing to maybe support Republicans from time to time or buck the party from time to time. And so I think that would be, a good strategy. I mean, I'm sure Harrison will have great advisors and he's got tons of experience. And so I'm sure he'll figure out what to do. But I think in some ways, Cunningham is a pretty good model for how, in 2020 to be a Democrat from a fairly conservative state like South Carolina, from a deep South state like South Carolina.
Now, if Senator Lindsey Graham is reelected, what should he do? Since you just said that South Carolina is still a fairly conservative state.
So I personally, really liked the Lindsey Graham from many years ago. The Lindsey Graham who was willing to work, across the aisle, who worked with Joe Biden, who worked with Democrats. I feel like, we've become so polarized. He's done less of that, and he's become so partisan. So, maybe that's wishful thinking, but I'd really like to see Lindsey Graham go back to that. Even if it means that he becomes a little more vulnerable in a primary, I'd like to see a Lindsey Graham who, really tries to govern for, all South Carolina and not just become so partisan. I feel like he's become so partisan over the last few years. And I don't think that's necessarily where the state is. I mean, I think the state is a Republican leaning state, but it is not a completely partisan, Republican, and only Republican state. I do think that I'd like to see Lindsey Graham reach across the aisle and go back to maybe the old Lindsey Graham from, 10 years ago.
Now, where will the state of South Carolina be the next 4 years politically?
Great question. So, I've always thought about I study the South a lot, and I think about, the 11 southern states. Is South Carolina going to go the way of Alabama and Mississippi? I mean, those are both deep South states. I sort of see South Carolina following the path of Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia more. Those are states that are really growing. They are in reasonable proximity to South Carolina. And so I think South Carolina is going to become increasingly competitive. I don't think it's going to be a place, I think it's going to be a growth state. It's going to be, the secret is out. People, are going to want to move to South Carolina to take advantage of the great weather and the job opportunities. But I do think it's a state that's going to become more competitive. It's not going to be a lock for Republicans anymore. I think it'll be a state that's still, leans Republican, but the right Democrat can win in South Carolina. Whether it's going to happen in 2020, we don't know for sure. But I do think the right Democrat can win in South Carolina. That's something that Joe Cunningham proved in 2018. And I think other people are going to be able to replicate what he's been able to do here in Charleston.
Dr. Gibbs Knotts, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Likewise.